Hi, thank you so much to Barbara and all of the NYFF team for having us today. I'm so excited today to be joined by the fantastic Lesli Klainberg and Eugene Hernandez, who are heading up everything at Film at Lincoln Center, New York Film Festival, and so many more within all of their spaces. And I wanted to start the conversation by kind of looking back to the beginning of the pandemic and those first few weeks, because it was such a trepidatious time for everybody within the film industry in trying to figure out what are we doing as an organization. And so I was very interested for both of you in what those first few weeks looked like as you tried to navigate and figure out what your presence in the industry was going to be, the point at which you started to realize that things were going to transition to virtual, and how you really approached that at the beginning.
I guess I'll start that one, Eugene, and then you come in. Well, I mean, I think we were just like every other arts organization and every other company in the world, experiencing the beginning of the pandemic. We are on the Lincoln Center campus, so it was actually campus-wide that there was a decision made to close down all the venues. So it felt like pretty quick. It feels like a long time ago, but it wasn't that long time ago. But it feels like a distant memory almost. But it was very quick that we realized we needed to shut down. For how long, we didn't know. You know, we knew we sent people home from the office. For how long, we didn't know. You know, to be honest, there was just a lot of uncertainty. And by the way, there's still a lot of uncertainty. It's not, the uncertainty hasn't gone away exactly. There's been more clarity, but there's certainly still a lot of uncertainty. You know, we really did have to pivot quickly. Our team worked tirelessly actually to figure out a proper digital platform and a way to adjust the work that we were doing. But frankly, some of the work that we did, we couldn't continue. That's, you know, there just was no substitute for not having the ability to go into schools as part of our education program, or, you know, just some of the basic things that we do, like many other companies. Again, we're all in the same boat. Fortunately, we had a goal and a project in the form of the film festival, the New York Film Festival, that really anchored us and helped us to consider our path as we move forward. And, you know, we had a goal to look towards, and we kind of refocus the energy of the organization on the sort of basic, you know, offering of these new releases, which we're able to do pretty quickly, but via the distribution and studio platforms. And then really we started to shift our focus to what we might be able to do with the New York Film Festival.
And what was the point where you realized that the new weren't going to open up, and the next festival was going to have to be completely reimagined? Because, you know, the day after you start planning for the next iteration, so, you know, you were already very deep in the throes of putting a lot of those logistics together. So what was the point at which you realized that it was going to be a shift? And what was that journey in trying to reimagine and build a festival when you were already halfway through the planning stages?
And I think one of the things that was so meaningful to us, to Lesli and I, she and I have talked about this a lot. It's a great question, Mara, because I think one of the things we've realized is how much we would need to rely on our colleagues, either at Lincoln Center, as Lesli mentioned. You know, as one of the EDs of Lincoln Center, Lesli is in constant communication with the leadership of other constituents at Lincoln Center and the broader Lincoln Center leadership. So that was really, that example, first of all, was really meaningful to us, because it showed us from before day one that if we were going to get through this, it was going to be because of our relationships that we've, you know, that Lesli, myself, our colleagues have already built for so many years with folks out in the field at organizations that were facing the same kinds of things. So I think you can kind of use that same exact example with how we tackled the festival. I mean, Lesli, how many conversations were we on with, you know, festival directors or heads of organizations from around the country, around the world, right? We were doing Zoom calls with, like, the head of the Venice Film Festival, the head of, you know, like, just people from all over the world and all over across the country and the city. I mean, we were multiple times a week, right, having these conversations with our colleagues about best practices and what to do and what to expect. I mean, that was really the beginning of it for us, was just reaching out and connecting with people
Yeah.
virtual like that, just like this, right?
Well, and I think we talked to some people we never really speak to. Not that we wouldn't speak to them, like if they came to us, we would say hello, but we didn't have any conversations with people like the folks from the Venice Film Festival, talking to the people from Telluride, talking to Toronto, talking to Sundance, talking to us, all of us kind of thinking together about how we might approach the festival season upcoming. And a lot of that, of course, is to focus on the filmmakers. Filmmakers, their films were still, still made, still ready to go out. What are we doing for those filmmakers? How many films and filmmakers are going to hold back their films? That was a big question, but there was a lot of collegiality, camaraderie, and assistance that people afforded each other, including the things like creating the more robust digital platform that Toronto, Sundance, and our organization have been using, and sharing information, sharing technical expertise, and just generally sharing, which is a great feeling. And not unknown, by the way, we talk a lot amongst the other art house, film organizations and festivals, of course, but as Eugene was alluding to, there's this group of folks in New York City and the tri-state area that are running not-for-profit art houses. We were all in communication and still are. So, it's every week someone's asking a question, because of course the rules are changing every day, every week. So, we're all trying to be helpful to each other.
Absolutely, that sense of community was kind of, I think, what got everybody through it. And from those conversations we were having, particularly as you were starting to look at how other festivals were to still have their iterations, whether they're doing dates, whether they're going fully virtual, whether they were doing drive-in elements, what are some of the decisions that you make for your film festival that you feel came exclusively from those conversations, that community and those relationships, and really getting to share that knowledge with other people?
I think a great example of it, one great example, probably the best example I can point to, comes from our connection with Rooftop Films at last year's festival, and working with Rooftop Films to activate the festival and drive-ins. In the spring, we didn't know that was going to be. We couldn't have predicted. There's no way we could have imagined that the way that the festival would happen, 6 months later, would be in drive-ins in parts of the city that are not in Manhattan, and also on a virtual platform that would take the festival to parts of the country that are not New York. This was just like such a big change for us. Now, we laid a foundation with that because we had conversations before the pandemic, Lesli and myself, our board, our staff, numerous conversations about how for the festival in 2020, our goal was to expand and change the footprint of the festival. We wanted to be at Lincoln Center, of course. We weren't able to be last year. Thankfully, we'll be back at Lincoln Center this year. Knock on wood. But we had walked into 2020 with a goal of expanding the footprint of the festival to other parts of the city. And so thankfully, when I had lunch with the folks at Rooftop Films and have a long, connection with them, and just as a fan of the work they do in the city and bringing movies to all parts of the city, we had a conversation with them before the pandemic and just say, hey, wouldn't it be great if, as we're trying to expand the footprint of the festival this year, it was my first year in this role, if we could work together to bring some aspect of the festival to the city in partnership with Rooftop Films. When we had that conversation in like February or early March, we had no idea that would be the way we would bring the festival at all to the city in a physical way, would be with Rooftop Films. So I think that's the best example. There's plenty of examples like Lesli was talking about. I was in this role for the first year, for the first time at the same time that Tabitha Jackson at Sundance was in the role for her first time. And so how many late night text messages did Tabitha and I have, just like comparing notes. And as Lesli mentioned, we all decided to use the same digital platform for our virtual, which is this platform that we all worked on together with Sundance, ourselves, and Toronto. So there was a lot of places to rely on kind of those community and connections and partnerships and relationships. But I think Rooftop is probably the best example of a speculative lunch in like March becoming like the reality of our festival, 6 months later.
And thinking about community in the wider sense, a huge part of the experience of coming to a festival is, sitting in a room with other people, having that experiential moment when you all laugh quietly to something, and then all of a sudden it's a really loud noise collectively, and just the energy of the room, that interactivity in line for the bathroom, and all those small, tiny moments that really add to sensibility. I'm getting tingles because I just want to be back in that right now. And beyond just thinking about the sense of community for the festival, you also have memberships that you're serving throughout the year. And so what are the ways in which you've had to completely reimagine that sense of recreate it in the virtual landscape, all the while knowing that there are limitations and there's certain things that you just can't do in the landscape at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a testament to our staff, frankly, that we're able to basically start up a new business pretty quickly. Like, we changed our business in about 2 weeks. And one of the things that we had to change was the model of how we work with and serve our members. Membership is really a value proposition around people getting a certain access and number of tickets, and members range there. We have memberships that are $75 and some that are $5,000 and $10,000 and $15,000. Those patrons support us as our members do. We rely on membership and contributed income. We're not for profit. So, we really did have to work pretty hard. I'm thinking about our development staff and our events staff coming up with new and innovative ways to connect with filmmakers and studios and distributors who were all themselves trying to figure out how to do the same thing. I mean, nobody knew what they were doing in the best possible or the worst possible way. I don't know how to say that, but we were all figuring it out. So the folks at Kino Lorber, they were figuring it out, and they were working with us to help us figure it out. And the folks at, Strand, and the folks at Sony Picture Classics. And, I can't imagine or think of any company that we didn't interact with, that we didn't figure out a way to make it work. And I think, look, the fact that, as Eugene said, during the festival, we reached this extraordinary audience. We reached all 50 states, and, we normally reach one state. I mean, New York, right? We normally reach Connecticut, New Jersey, okay, I'm being a little generous, but, for us to reach the whole country, and several territories, which I'm not really sure which they are, but that's what I'm told, then that's an extraordinary thing for us, to be able to offer that content and curation, because that is the heart of what we do. I like to think of ourselves as a hub of film culture, and I believe that that's true when we exist in a physical space, but also we've learned in this virtual space as well. And I think the intimacy of talking to a filmmaker, even just the way that Eugene and I are talking to you now, it actually changes the dynamic somewhat. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this happens in the future. We want that moment. Our theaters are open now. We've had new director screenings there. People are watching Wong Kar-wai. So that experience we want people to still have, and that's our core business. We want people to come back to theaters. But this has been a really interesting test of our system, of our business. And frankly, again, as I said, it's just the fact that our staff was able to pivot so quickly and be so creative and open along with other people is what allowed for us to really persevere and survive and sustain ourselves. Because I will say this, Maura, the main thing we said is, frankly, priority number one is sustaining the organization. We're not making enough money in any of these models to keep our business going in the way that we would when all of our theaters are open. So we're so happy that, the fall is going to come and we're going to see more of that. But, we've really had to rely on the support of our members and patrons and people in the industry in order to get by, and the support of our staff, to come along with us. And it was very challenging for everybody.
Did you find that when it came to things like development or membership or donations, that there were certain, ebbs and flows to that? Because I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, it was obviously every organization that was struggling was reaching out and asking for support, and people were so willing to do it. And then as more and more people lost their jobs, it became more challenging to make those decisions. And so did you find yourself having to constantly reimagine what development and what support from external forces looked like throughout the entire year?
Yeah, I'll give a quick short answer for that, and then I'll let you say, but just to say that, yeah, of course, because, and our budget was smaller, and, all of the work that we did, as I said, like, we had to really focus and prioritize. And for us, that meant prioritizing our tentpole festivals that we have every year, focusing a lot of our energy on that. But yeah, we've had to do special, and we wanted to do special screenings and events for our members, because, as you say, it's the members who are the ones who sustain us, but also what do we have to offer them? We want to be able to offer them something that is special. And I think our team worked very diligently and continues to work diligently to bring exclusive screenings or previews and Q&As, to our audiences, because they're hungry for it.
And you were touching just before on a lot of those conversations that you were having with distributors. And like you said, they were trying to figure out this entire landscape at the same time. And, what does that mean for security of a film, for potential privacy? How does that differ if you're an online platform versus a platform? And I know at the beginning, there were some studios that would do drive-in exclusively and not necessarily a virtual platform, and maybe vice versa. And so what did a lot of those conversations and re-navigating the landscape look like as you were trying to do it hand in hand with each other at the same time, and even just figure out, is this going to be locked to certain regions? Is it going to be available to everybody? Is there a capacity limit the same that there would be in a theater with those questions?
Yeah, these were big. Well, on the one hand, these are still evolving discussions, because as Leslie mentioned, our theaters are just reopening. So, we're still, everything we're talking about is still recent enough that we're still in a version of, of an alternate universe from what we're all used to, not just in our work, in our lives. We're having these conversations from our homes. We're not, together on a stage or in a space somewhere. So everything is still evolving. But just as we're currently evolving and figuring out how we come back, how you sustain an organization, as Leslie is saying, on a limited number of screenings per day with a limited audience per day, and a virtual platform, we've had to, thankfully, the industry has been really responsive and nimble and open to trying to figure this out. That was never a guarantee. It certainly would have been easier to just say, let's just put everything on hold. Let's just freeze everything we're doing. Let's wait till movie theaters are back and movies can be released the way we've always released them. But certainly our organization, our staff, as Leslie mentioned, we weren't going to sit on our hands. It's like, well, let's figure out what we can do instead. What can we do differently? How can we serve our audience differently and still, support and sustain the mission of the organization? As it relates to the industry, so many of our industry partners said, well, what can we do? What can we do? How can we, if you guys are going to create this platform, this virtual platform, how can we support that? How can we create a whole new economic model so that it actually works for you and for the filmmakers, for the distributors? So we had to, as Leslie said, within a matter of weeks, it's crazy to think about it now, but within a matter of weeks, we had honed in on a platform. We had renegotiated the way we would screen films, how we would price them, how they would be available to an audience, what the economic model would be for that interim situation until theaters would reopen. And up until just a couple of months ago, we didn't know when that date would even be, the theaters would reopen. We sort of in our most sort of rational minds, I think just a few months ago, Leslie, we were like, okay, well, if we can reopen in the fall, that would be great. If we can open by September, then that'll give us a few weeks before the festival starts. And then, lo and behold, it's middle of May and we're in theaters again in limited numbers. But we're things are starting to reopen. But the conversations with the industry, to your point, have been really open and really creative and really, it was easy to say before the pandemic that the film industry was so stuck in its ways and traditional and didn't want to ever do things differently. But then we've proved to ourselves in the film community that we could be we could be nimble and we could try things differently. And it's still evolving. Like, we've tried things a certain way and we're continuing to evolve it as we go. And this year's festival won't look exactly like last year's, which didn't look at all like the one from the year before that. But it's like, it's evolving as we speak.
And I wanted to touch upon something that Leslie was mentioning before in regards to the fact that the festival was no longer New York specific and you were able to reach the entire country. And even beyond that, a lot of the talks that you did where you didn't have to worry about rights and distributor restrictions, were able to be accessed internationally as well. So it really broadened the scope. And, going back to festivals in person as well, there's also even been a lot of conversations about the accessibility element, whether it's the cost of traveling for a festival or the disability community as well. And is that something that, as you look to iterations next year and the year beyond, that you're starting to think about what that might look like and where the festival can continue to have that broad of a reach, that far of a reach?
We had been, yes, because we had been, for the last number of years now, we've been experimenting with different ways to incorporate conversation into our, not just the festival, but you're asking about the festival, so yes, for sure. But as an organization, when we opened our film center on 65th Street 10 years ago, we started to experiment with different kinds of talks and conversations, panels, discussions in the amphitheater space there that was just like perfectly kind of situated for that kind of thing. And then we started experimenting with live streaming. We would live stream all the talks. And then we thought, well, maybe if we don't live stream them, we record them, then we can, and Leslie has a filmmaking background and made documentaries and was able to say, well, what if we were actually able to shoot the conversations, then we could actually kind of cut them together a little bit better and have a little bit better sound and image quality. So then we started seeing a lot of traffic to our YouTube channel because we're producing the content a little bit better. And so I think, again, we couldn't have predicted it, couldn't have imagined it. We started experimenting with podcasts a few years ago. So we had all these resources that we've been building and laying a foundation for. So then when the pandemic happened and we didn't know how we would be able to connect with our audience, either existing in New York, as you talk about, or internationally, we had these tools, we had these platforms that we could rely on, that we could then go back to and say, well, what if we accelerate that work? What if we do more on those platforms? So in reimagining this year's festival and in reimagining a new structure for the festival, we honed it down to kind of 5 key sections. And one of those key sections, alongside the other kind of core aspects of the festival, was talks, and really amplifying and really making talks not as a subsection of within any part of the festival, but right next to everything else. So we really worked hard the team that puts the talks together worked really hard. Devika and Maddie worked hard to find the best moderators. They didn't have to even travel to New York. All they had to do was turn on their phone or their laptop, and we had an amazing array of filmmakers and talks participants and moderators and panelists from literally all over the world in a way that we've never been able to. The festival has a long history of really amazing conversations that have been kind of alongside the films for its history, for its 59-year history. But I really felt like last year we were able to kind of deliver in a whole new way, kind of people from everywhere around the world participating in the festival as part of the conversation, and then as part of the audience. And that's an area that kind of builds on the potential for our organization. I'm teeing up Leslie to tell you more about how that connects to kind of the history of the organization, the kind of archive of content that this allows us to kind of continue to build at our organization, which is kind of part of the legacy of our organization as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just add to that quickly, just that, we do have a very robust, we use the word archive loosely, yeah. But we have a kind of closet that's filled with a lot of drives. It's made up of all the Q&As, and we've had talks we've had in our theaters over the last 25, 30 years. So we have a wonderful history of film within these talks that we want to make available. And of course, we have a Film Comment magazine, which is, one of the most important film journals in our country. And that collection of magazines is also being digitized properly so that we can offer that to our subscribers and members in the coming months. This is all part of keeping, film at the center of our culture in a way that, raises it up, because, in many ways, film is our culture now. But we're looking at it from a slightly different perspective, and between our history of showing films, and New Directors just celebrated 50 years, and as Eugene said, 10 years of our film center, 30 years of the Walter Reed this year, the 59th New York Film Festival. So we're getting up there, and we have something to share, but we have a place and a space to grow. And I think that's actually the lesson for me of this year, is that, there's a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of work that we want to continue to do and actually invest in, even more so than we have, because we've even done certain things kind of catch as catch can, because we can do it, and people are pretty good at kind of doing 10 things at one time. And so why don't we just throw in the academies, and why don't we kind of throw this in? But, we really need to not just throw stuff like that together. We need to have focused attention and strategy applied to it, beyond just sort of the fact that we can do it because we're good at kind of making things happen. We have to have a little bit more on the ball than that.
And when it comes to events, whether it's reopening the theaters, whether it's something like the Chaplin Gala or the festival, how are you thinking about mapping out a lot of the details when it comes to talent participation as we start to go back to in person, and thinking about the fact that at the same time, talent may not be open to traveling as readily, and there might not be that same availability of talent in person? How are you navigating thinking about that space for a lot of your events?
Well, I'll speak for just about a couple of things. I'll let Eugene respond about the festival, but I think, the next few months and maybe the next couple of years, I think we're going to still see this prevalence of this maybe hybrid festivals or hybrid events. And, will the technology all to catch up with it? We'll have to work on that part. But I see a space where we can have an event in the Walter Reed where we are bringing in effectively a filmmaker who might be in another part of the world. And, I think the pretense and the idea of somebody appearing on a screen is now so normal. It's not awkward anymore, right? And we did some very funky versions of that made our staff very worried. Remember, we did something with like Ben Affleck, and he was like on his phone, and he was like, that kind of thing. It's like, for an important thing, but that was like a number of years ago when it was all like, not, is this working? I think, we're getting more advanced, and I'm eager to go into the theater and see what we can do to bring that technology into the theater a little bit better. But I don't see us getting out of the business of trying to at least make, as Eugene said, our original content available to people, because that's what we do that is specific to us. It's Eugene sitting down with a filmmaker. It's Dennis sitting down with a filmmaker. It's our curation from our team. And that's what we bring that's unique. And I think that we'll think of a lot of different ways to share that content.
And looking at the festival this year, you had the drive-in element last year in Myriad with virtual platform, and now you're going to have the option for in-person. Is it kind of like a three-pronged structure that you're looking at, or are there other facets of interaction and screening that you're considering?
I mean, those are the fundamental three aspects, which is, indoor, outdoor, and virtual. I mean, just saying that out loud is a big change. It's just indoor, outdoor, and virtual. It's, that's two more areas than, the festival existed just 2 years ago. But what we do with that is the big question, right? And I think in some ways we're exactly where we were a year ago, in the sense that the collaboration, the partnership, the conversation that we're having with our colleagues. You know, as I mentioned earlier, Leslie's in constant conversation with the other leaders of Lincoln Center, and one of the things that brings me a lot of hope when I've been up at Lincoln Center just recently and coming back, you know, seeing our theaters open and everything else, is what's happening on campus as we speak right this minute at Lincoln Center with Restart Stages, and all the constituents of Lincoln Center coming together to kind of turn Lincoln Center literally inside out and open up spaces that didn't exist before. And our just from our vantage point, the ability to program in those spaces this summer, and then, you know, at the festival, like to have a festival that will take place indoors in whatever, you know, configuration is most comfortable for our audience and for the talent, as you mentioned, Mara, but also outdoors in a way that the festival will never have been able people will have never been able to experience the festival before in a you know, high quality outdoor environment at Lincoln Center. That's really exciting. And then on top of that, to be able to continue to build on what Leslie and I were talking about earlier, which is taking the festival totally outside of New York through the virtual platform to every state in the country, every territory, and engaging with audiences that, you know, like, I didn't grow up in New York like Leslie, and like I would dream of coming to the New York Film Festival when I was in college. Like I would read about it, subscribe to the Village Voice in LA, and read, you know, a week later all the things that were happening. And, you know, one of the great dreams I had was to be able to just go to the New York Film Festival someday. Now, like, you know, with Film Comment and all the other publications covering what's happening in film culture in New York and around the world, we're able to actually deliver some of that experience to people, you know, in their laptops or in their home televisions, whatever it may be. That is a huge transformation. So I think Leslie's exactly right. Like it's not about looking back and trying to like go back to where we were 2 years ago. It's like, how do we now take all this, you know, experience of the past year plus and going forward the next few years, as Leslie mentions, and actually turn that into something that, you know, creates and sustains an organization in ways that we never would have even imagined before.
I love it so much. And whenever I think about my experience in New York going to cinemas, you know, your spaces are one of the first spaces I think of in terms of that physical experience. And
yeah.
I have that again. And I want to thank you both so much for the conversation. And thank you again to New York Women in Film and Television for hosting it with us today.
Thanks for having us. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. All right, guys.